Hey YouTubers, I thought I would do a video on the Rocky Mountain Audio Fest that I attended this weekend. So this was RMAF 2013, October 11th, 12th, and 13th. I just went 2 out of 3 days. I don't think I could have taken it for 3 days. It's a massive, massive conference. Luckily for me, it's really near to my house. So what I did was I took a half day off on Friday and went to the conference for about 5 hours that day. And then I went for, gosh, most of the day yesterday. It was about 7 hours. So it was very tiring. I'm not really an extrovert. I'm more of an introvert. So being around people all day pretty much wipes me out. So I was ready to come home and be done with it at the end of yesterday. However, I had gobs of fun. I heard a lot of different cool systems. I heard a number of not so cool systems, and it was definitely worth the time, and I'm sure I'll do it again. So let's talk a bit more about the show. Now, I didn't set out to go to this thing and do a vlog about it. It's not my bag really to cover these things in detail, so I wasn't organized about that or anything. This is just sort of my reaction to things I saw and heard, especially after the fact. I did take a little bit of video, but it's just on my iPhone. So I'll have that mixed in here, but I mostly took some video when I got inspired to, and I didn't really plan it out to be a very professional sort of reporting, which will be very clear as you continue listening. So first off, the conference has been held for quite a while, I guess, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know how many exhibits there were this year. There had to be at least 150. That's like 150 hotel rooms or ballrooms, depending on the size of the vendor. I've seen that in past years they had 175 or so. I would say it was at least that many this time. You literally can't go to every exhibit. It's impossible in 3 days. I only did 2 days. I believe I walked past every door. I didn't go into every room, but I went into a hell of a lot of them. Towards the end, I was so wiped that I got a lot more picky about which rooms I went into. And the last one I went into, I'll talk about it at the end, but boy, am I glad that I went ahead and went on in because oddly enough, the best was saved until last for me. I'll talk about that a bit more later in the video. So one interesting aspect of these shows is it is, I would say, at least 80%, if not 90%, what I consider to be ultra high end. So, I mean, a lot of these rooms, the interconnects were worth more than my systems. Probably worth more than my systems in my car or both of my cars. Just the interconnects. So we're talking ultra high end stuff. Amplifiers in the tens of thousands easily. All this, a lot of the stuff. You'd have to have professional movers put it in your house. So to some extent, it's like just being in a fantasy land for a while. The funny thing is, this is not a fantasy land I would necessarily want to inhabit. These high-end systems are beautiful, they're cool, but you got to have room for them. You got to have power for them. Some of these speaker systems weigh 200-300 pounds. You can't even move them yourself. So it's not a practical landscape for a guy like me, even if I was loaded with the mega bucks. I don't think I would be all that interested in the top end systems that were at this show. But it's a lot of fun to listen to these systems and see what that kind of stuff sounds like and sort of take measure of what you're used to hearing against what these things can do. And honestly, some of the ultra high end systems did not impress me all that much. A couple of observations on the types of equipment showing up at the show. I had never heard of an 845 tube before I went to this show, and by the time I had left, I must have seen 10 power amplifiers with 845 tubes. These things, I don't have anything the size of them. Here we go. Like this. Big old fat audio tubes. Something like that. So I saw a bunch of systems with those in them. I want them. They look really cool. I'm sure they generate lots of heat. I didn't ever warm my hands over them, but they look awesome. One thing I noticed at the conference, and I guess I had kind of picked up on it just in general, but at the conference it became more obvious. High resolution is the word of the day. Obviously, high resolution digital is getting ready to really take off. It's not in the consumer mainstream yet, but it's going to be. And so that was a big theme at the conference. The other thing, and this is the most high resolution format there is, was tape and vinyl, analog. The reason analog is higher resolution is because it is in the original resolution. I mean, there is no quantization going on in um, traditional analog. So vinyl's a big deal too. I heard as many vinyl sources there as I did high resolution digital sources, and I believe I saw at least two, maybe three occurrences of reel to reel tape. One of which was, I'm certain, from the Tape Project, which is second generation copies of master tapes that you play at 15 inches per second, and that's probably the highest fidelity you can possibly get. That's only one generation away from the master. So pretty impressive stuff. Also a very expensive way to get high resolution analog. So I did take notes. Let's go through them in not great notes. All I did was write down the rooms that I liked the most, and I probably missed some. I'm sure I missed some. But here we go. The Emerald Acoustics. Those are open baffle speakers. Both appearances of those, both of those rooms, I love the sound in those rooms. Those are fairly affordable speakers on this relative scale we're talking about. So they're on the lower end of crazy. Sounded very good. One of my very favorites was the Krell Magico room. I had heard these were Magico S1s. I had heard the S1s at my dealers. I walked in there. I had some time one day and walked in, and he had literally just unboxed them, and he was really busy. And he was like, "Here," and he plugged them in and turned them on and left the room. And it was, I wish I knew what it was. It was some kind of acoustic blues duo that sounded phenomenal. It really sounded great. So they had Krell and Magico set up, and it was the S1s, and that just sounded really, really good. I believe those speakers go about 12K. They're at like the bottom of Magico's lineup, if that gives you an idea of where Magico sits in the market. Clear Audio Aesthetics and Focal Utopia room was great. I really loved it. It was nice, and this was a super, super expensive system. I don't even know. I'm guessing the speakers are tens of thousands by themselves. The Clear Audio turntable was their statement turntable. I'm not sure if that's the name of it, but it's the one that sits about probably about 45 inches tall. It's just on a series of racks, and it's got a belt-driven drive that's then magnetically coupled to the platter, which is separate. And the drive platter is lit from inside. I mean, it's crazy. It looks like a spaceship. Anyway, it was a really good sounding system. So my general observation, correctly or incorrectly, is that the regular Focal speakers, they're not the Utopia line. I've not been taken with their sound. They sound a bit nasally to me, and that has been true at this show and when I heard them at one of the dealers that I frequent. So maybe it's my ears. I don't know. I'm not terribly turned on by Focal's sort of standard lineup, but the Utopias sound really good, and I heard them in another room where they sounded great too, even larger ones. So then next was the next entry, Solution, which is a amplifier component brand I'd never heard of, and also Focal Utopias, and these were the giant Utopias, like refrigerator size things. Sounded really good. They had a lower end in relative terms turntable hooked up to that stuff. I've got some video. It'll come up. The sound on the video is going to be worthless, but it's there. So do with it. Sonus Faber and Acoustic Research. That room was really good, and these were the I don't remember the model number of the Sonus Fabers, but they were smaller floor standers, and I liked them quite a bit. That was a good setup. Sorry, I don't have the details. Like this isn't a professional overview. Next, Valve Amplification Company, VAC, and Tannoy and Esoteric Audio.
Very cool.
That was a really amazing sounding room. These Tannoy speakers, they were also like refrigerator sized. I had a couple of giant drivers. They looked like they were at least 12-inch drivers in them. Um, Interestingly, they had 5 binding posts on the back. One of the binding posts was for a ground for the baskets of these speakers. Anyway, it was a really dynamic and cool sounding system, and it also looked badass because the VAC gear all has these big VAC letters, so it was like all this black gear with blue VACs all over the place. Pretty impressive, and it was in a large room, and it lit that room up. It was really cool. Another one, I'm a little unclear about the company name. I think it's DC-10 Audio and Elliott Studio Arts. And the Elliott Studio Arts seem to be the amplification and componentry, and the DC-10 were the speakers. That was a very nice sounding setup. 'Cause no one can say how many nights it takes to heal. Nobody knows how bad a good woman can feel, except maybe. One that really surprised me was Vanatoo, Vanatoo. This is one of those things that you often will think is quirky and sort of, I don't know, Bose like. They're very tiny monitors, probably yay big. Self-powered, Class D amplification, and with a built-in DAC. And they produced really good sound. I didn't get to sit in the sweet spot, but that was okay because even slightly outside the sweet spot, these things sounded really good. I think they would probably make for a fantastic computer audio system, if nothing else, and possibly a great small room system. I didn't listen to them for a very long time, and I didn't love the choice of music, but they did produce a very full sound from an extremely tiny speaker. So probably worth checking out. Acoustic Zen, it's a Japanese company, and they were showing off their big 845 based tube amps. They were like $22,000 for the pair, and some really big, very heavy looking speakers that sounded really good. That was probably my second favorite room. The Doshi and Wilson room, I think they were Wilson Alexias. I may have that name wrong. And Doshi was tube amplification. Sounded awesome, and they had a giant reel-to-reel deck driving that system. That sounded really good. I'm going to save my favorite for last. I'll talk about one miss. I did not hear Vandersteen's sound good at the conference, in my opinion, and I want to like those speakers there. I kind of was thinking I might be in the market for 2 CEs or CIs or whatever's current, and they didn't have any of those. They had their higher end ones. uh, I heard their biggest ones. Again, I didn't take a lot of notes. They're the top of the line of theirs. They produced gobs of sound, super loud, super clean, but not really that involving to me. And they were amplified with, again, acoustic research. Acoustic research showed up many times at the conference. So the biggest thrill about getting to hear the big boys was the guy put on Thomas Dolby's Flat Earth album, and left it on long enough for me to hear my favorite tune off the album, which was great. And it sounded good, but it just didn't make me go, wow, I wish I had $60,000 so I could have this system. So to my favorite, the last room I went to, and honestly the best one I went to, is Prana Fidelity. And this is also a local guy, and I didn't know that going into the room. I'd never heard of this company. It's basically a one guy company. And his name is Steve. Let's see here. I think it's Steve Norbert. Let's see if I can find his. Steve Norbert, Prana Fidelity, right here in Denver, not too far from my house. He has his own amplification that he builds, preamp and power amp. He was showing those off. And he had those hooked up to a Kuzma turntable, which was about a $25,000 turntable. A big, impressive turntable, very nice. He interestingly had a Denon 103 something or other cartridge on it, which is, I don't know, $150. And I think the winner of the show was his speakers. He had a pair of speakers there that were they're bookshelves or larger monitor size speakers, and they sounded amazing. The system sounded so good. I spent easily 10 times as long in that room as I did in any other room in the place. He played a lot of good music. I brought in my Cafe Noir album, and he played one of the cuts off that, and I got to hear it in the sweet spot. So good. And so then I moved out of the sweet spot and, just sort of moved back to let other people have the front row, and listened from second row for a while. And then I stood up to let other people sit down, and I just stayed there standing up listening. These speakers, they were called the 5090, were just amazing. And they're basically just stand mount box speakers. There's nothing special looking about them. They're ported. They've got a symmetric design with two, look like 6.5-inch drivers and a larger tweeter. It's not your typical 1-inch tweeter. It might be a 1.5-inch tweeter. And so it was almost in a Diapolito array, except that the tweeter was offset and balanced by a port. So, not a crazy looking design. I don't know what kind of crossover they had, but whatever it was working. It was working incredibly. Just amazing.
I tried. That can't be, 'cause I can't see my strange little world just go passing me by. Let people.
So I'm trying to figure out how to make myself buy these speakers. They're $4,000. I think that's an incredible bargain, given the other stuff that I heard at the show that was an order of magnitude more expensive. I heard things in there that really made me want to have these in my listening room, provided they work well in it. So I'm going to be contacting him, and if I can work on my wife to let me spend the big bucks, I might go for these, even though I had convinced myself maybe if I bought new speakers, I kind of wanted to move away from traditional box designs. The Model 5090 is $39.50, and I'd say worth every penny from what I heard. It's an efficient speaker. It's sensitive, so he said it'll run on a fairly low powered system. It provides a fairly constant 8 ohm load, so it should be easy to drive. It seems like a winner in every way. It loaded that room up like you wouldn't believe. So anyway, I've gone on long enough about that. There was also at the conference aside from the rooms with traditional stereo equipment, there was a huge thing called CanJam that was like 2 or 3 ballrooms put together, and it was just totally loaded with headphone amps, DACs, DAC/headphone amps, high def music streaming, you name it. It was headphony. It was craziness. So I went in there basically last, and honestly, I like headphones, but I didn't have the energy to put too much into it. Okay, so that's about 20 minutes worth. I think that's enough for this video. There's a couple of other things that I'll cover in separate videos. One is Kimber Cable's display, which was pretty cool. Two is basically a haul video for some of the vinyl I picked up. The conference had a great ballroom or two joined together that was just loaded with audiophile vinyl vendors and used vinyl vendors. And so I spent a good 2 hours in there fooling around and spent too much money on vinyl. So I'll cover that in a separate video. And then the headphone content, as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, if folks want to see the minimal stuff that I have, uh, I'll produce that and put it up too. So thanks for watching all this time, and I'll catch you later.